Hi, I'm Ellen Smith. I'm math faculty out at Fort Campbell, and I'm co-chair of the E3 Assessment Committee. Our committee is tasked with reporting data and statistics to SACS that involve the transformational learning experiences. Specifically, SACS asked us to develop a rubric for these transformational learning experiences and to do something, and they suggested having a workshop for faculty to reduce inter-rater reliability. So in other words, we want every rater, every person who's going to be evaluating by these rubrics, to be on the same page and to be rating approximately in the same ways. And that's what we're hoping to accomplish by the workshop and this video that accompanies the workshop. So basically this is a shortened, condensed version of the workshop in this video, and we want you to use this video to refresh your mind on all of the things that we talked about in the workshop. So, as you may recall, we took our rubric directly from the AAC&U value rubrics and we adapted it and tweaked it slightly. So there's 16 different value rubrics that the AAC&U has created, and of these rubrics we chose Integrative Learning because we felt it matched us the best, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And we only used part of that rubric. But the AAC&U is a very well-respected organization, especially by accrediting institutions like SACS, and basically they took teams of faculty, lots and lots of faculty, and they had them look at dozens and dozens and dozens of rubrics that addressed each SLO, and they chose the best parts of each rubric, and then they also asked for more faculty input after that. And then Integrative Learning is the particular rubric we chose because we felt of all the 16 value rubrics that was most closely aligned with what we're trying to do with our QEP and transformational learning experiences. So if you're familiar with the QEP, this definition by AAC&U for integrative learning will sound really familiar. Basically, integrative learning is an understanding and a disposition or an attitude that a student builds across both the curriculum, so the regular courses, and the co-curriculum, not so much courses, for making simple connections among ideas and experiences to synthesizing and transferring learning to new, complex situations, both within campus and beyond campus. So that's what integrative learning is about. Assignments, as you think about the types of assignments you want to do, and you've probably already done this, you want to choose assignments that are going to most positively reflect integrative learning. Particularly, you're going to want students to tell students that they need to draw implications or prompt them to draw implications. So these connections often surface in reflective work, self-assessment, or creative endeavors. So those are the types of assignments you may want to ask your students to do. Primarily, we want to talk about the rubric in this video, so we'll jump right into the rubric. On one side of the printed rubric from AAC&U, you would have this information, and we talked about a lot of this in the workshop, almost all of this in the workshop, and we've talked about a little bit of it here, particularly the definition part of integrative learning. And now we're going to talk about the part of the glossary that's relevant to the learning outcomes that we selected. So basically, all of the definitions from the rubric that you would probably need to know that are very specific to this rubric. Other definitions you could just look up in a regular dictionary, but this is particularly how AAC&U envisioned these terms. So for context, they're looking for situations that you put the student in to demonstrate learning outcomes. So these could be real life situations or simulated situations. For the co-curriculum, what we're looking at is anything that is not part of a regular course, but yet it goes along with the curriculum and it supports the curriculum, and it's teaching the same types of principles that are learned in the curriculum. And examples they give are almost all university activities would fall under the co-curriculum because they're still learning about different aspects of the university life, and then community service also falls under there. And then when the term experience is used in the context of these rubrics, we're talking about something that takes place outside of the formal classroom. So it could and probably is associated with a course. It doesn't have to be associated with a course though. It could be the workplace or service learning or an internship, and some of these are associated with courses and some of them aren't. And then we have a pretty good definition of reflection and what reflection is, but specifically AAC&U is defining it as a metacognitive act of examining the student examining his or her own performance to try to determine significance and consequences of that performance. So that's particularly what the AAC&U is talking about in the rubric. And then for self-assessment, again, kind of similar, and we already have good ideas, but particularly the AAC&U is talking about describing, interpreting, and judging a performance, your own performance, based on expectations. And then we have several guidelines or steps to assess that we would hope that you would try to follow, because if every rater is following these guidelines, then our inter-rater reliability will, I hope, be optimized by these guidelines. So we would like to ask, and most of these guidelines, by the way, come from the AAC&U recommendations for how to evaluate using these rubrics. So we would like for you to look at the rubric and review each different element of the rubric, so each descriptor, each point level. If there's anything that you have questions on, please ask questions, and I'll give you some contact information so you'll know who to ask near the end of this video. And then this will be obvious when I show my screenshots of the rubric itself. We want you to start at the right side of the rubric and work your way to the left. So if read the 1 descriptor, and if the artifact has no evidence for 1, then you've got to give it a 0. And if it does have evidence for a 1, then you can keep moving left. So look at 2 if it has evidence for 1, and if 2 is met, you can keep moving left and look at 3, and so on. And then this is sort of a starting place of what we're expecting, to let you know that we're not expecting everyone to get a 4. A 4 is not an A, a 3 is not a B, a 2 is not a C, a 1 is not a D. Actually, a 1's quite decent if you are a freshman. So both freshmen and sophomores, we're hoping that most of them will score 1s. We're not certain that that's going to happen, but that's what we're hoping. And then most juniors, a 2, most seniors, a 3, and then graduate students would be a 4, or somebody who's right on the cusp of graduation on graduation day. We would hope that most of them would be a 4 as well. But we really don't know what to expect of Austin Peay students until after this first pilot year. And then we'd like to ask you to look only at the artifact that's in the Dropbox, or the artifacts that are in the Dropbox when you're trying to evaluate using the rubric. So I know the student has done a lot of extra work for you, and you have all of that in mind, and it's hard to ignore that, but ignore it to the best of your ability. And then we'd also like to ask that you, when you find evidence of the work, that you include those quotes in the comments, and I'll show you how to do that when I demonstrate D2L. But if you could include quotes and include justification of, from this quote, it seems that the student did this but not this, and that's why 2 was justified but not a 3. And then if you are requiring the student turn in multiple artifacts to address the 3 SLOs, we would ask that you would say which artifacts address which SLOs. So, for example, if you're asking that they do a video file for SLOs 1 and 2 and a Word file for SLO 3, if you could just put that in your Dropbox instructions, that would be awesome. Thank you. And then, last but not least on our guidelines, is to keep in mind that assessing is very different from grading. The AAC&U, when we went to their conference, drilled this into us. Assessing is not the same thing as grading. When you are assessing, it's only looking at the student learning outcomes that you want the student to do. Grading is much more broad in general than just looking at outcomes. So we don't expect you to use these rubrics to grade your students with. As a matter of fact, since they're so sort of a 1 is good if you're a freshman, or decent if you're a freshman, it would be hard to convert that to a grade. And so here is the rubric itself for SLO 1 at least, and as I said, we're going to move from right to left. So start with the rightmost descriptor and we'll read 1, and again if 1 doesn't make it, then we'll have to assign a 0. And then as we make each one, we can keep moving left. So for SLO 1, we said the beginner needs to at least identify connections. And remember that SLO 1 is all about thinking, so the student is what the student's thinking, and it may be meta thinking, but it's just thinking, it's not action. And so if the student identifies, that's 1 point. If the student compares the different experiences, that's 2 points. If the student selects and develops, really gives lots of detailed examples that illuminate concepts and theories and frameworks and connect all of those, that's going to be 3 points. And then if there is synthesis, that's going to be 4 points. So specifically, if you recall the artifact back from the workshop, and you can download that artifact as you watch the video if you want to pause the video here and refresh your memory on the artifact. But basically, we thought the most relevant quote on thinking came right here, as I show in the screenshot. I found this work to be very exciting, and as I started to take more upper division courses, began to understand the clear picture of how what I learned in class was applicable to my research project. So here she says that she made connections, but she never identifies any specific connections. And so for that reason, I would lean toward a 0, but I can kind of see why you would justify 1 as well. And so either a 0 or a 1 is what we think, what we discussed and decided were the best options for this particular artifact in SLO 1. And we're not expecting everybody to come with the same number, but what we would like is for the consensus, the vast majority of people, to agree on 2 numbers. And so those are the 2 numbers we agreed on for SLO 1. And then SLO 2, more about action instead of thinking. 1 point, again, starts with just using in a very, very basic way. And then it's 2 points is using in a more typical way. 3 points is actually applying, but it's also adapting. And whenever you see and, it's got to be both. So adapting and applying. So if they apply, but they don't adapt, that's still just 2 points, not 3 points. It's got to be both. They have to both tweak what they learned in class and apply it. So it can't be a straightforward application. It has to be adapted and applied. And then for 4 points, they've got to do that independently, which is pretty much typical. But even more than that, they've got to do it for either an ill-defined problem or a complex issue. And here, because we see the or, that means that we have a choice. So it doesn't have to be both. So if it's not an ill-defined problem, but it is a complex issue, then that works for 4. Specifically for our short artifact that we discussed in the workshop, this is the quote that I thought was most germane to SLO 2. While I am only studying 2 small stream systems in Tennessee, what I find may be important for how many other streams are treated or even affected by the streams I'm focusing on. And so for this quote, we decided a 1 or a 2. And really, it's hard to decide on this quote if you're not a biologist or a field stream expert or related to this field. So this really requires some subject matter expertise. And I would say this SLO always requires a bit of subject matter expertise, because in order to be familiar with the skills, abilities, theories, and methodologies, to know if it's used in just a basic way or if it's adapted and applied, you've got to really know what those theories are and those skills are and those methodologies are. But a biologist has informed me that this is just really basic, and so you might make the case that it's more typical, but a 1 or 2 is probably the most appropriate answers for these. And then step 3, or SLO 3, is reflection. So 1 point is just very general descriptors of success and failure. They've got to at least address success and failure, though, and even to earn 1 point. So if they never mention success and failure, that's going to be 0. And then if they very clearly specify what their strengths were and their challenges were, again, we're using the word and, so it's got to be both, that warrants 2 points. And then if they evaluate how they have evolved in their learning process over time, that would be 3 points. But remember, they've got to do all of the stuff below it as well to reach the 3 points. And then if they do all of that plus give personal development intentions, that's going to be 4 points. And so for SLO 3, we felt like this quote and another quote were most appropriate. Not only did this conference help me to understand the many different ways my field experiences can apply to a real-life research lab, or maybe even a real-life job, but having to present my work during the poster session helped me understand that I have a long way to go in my project. And then additionally, the student said, these ideas will help me adjust some of my field work and get even more data to help address the quality of not only the stream conditions, but also the quality of work I'm doing in the field. So we thought, yeah, general descriptors of success and failure, that's for sure, so 1 point. And then we could see how someone might make the case that they have articulated both strengths and challenges. And, that's kind of subjective, so between a 1 or a 2 on this one. And so now that we have talked about the rubric and all of the guidelines for the rubric and the rubric itself, we want to talk about designing assignments. When you go to create the assignments that you're going to use for the artifacts, we would ask that you do 3 things. Number 1, make certain the assignments are created or recorded digitally so that they can be added to the Dropbox. Number 2, ensure that the instructions require students to fully and completely address each SLO. And you'll probably want to use a lot of the language that's in the rubric itself to ask students to be able to adapt and apply, to do all of the stuff that's included in all 4 points of the rubric. And then the third thing is that we want you to have students submit their assignments to the D2L Dropbox so that they are there for evaluation purposes, because that's where we're going to, after you have assessed them, that is where we're going to go and pull our data from. And speaking of the D2L Dropbox, this section is pretty much all about the D2L Dropbox. If you are completely familiar with how to use the D2L Dropbox, to edit the D2L Dropbox, and to assess using rubrics, then this section of the video is not really for you, and you can just pause the video here. There's also some contact information on this slide if you need help. So if you're missing the stuff that should be in there, if you needed the E3 office to create your shell, or everyone pretty much needs the E3 office to put their Dropbox and their rubric in there. If any of those things are missing, 6760 is the number to call for the E3 office. And then, and this is probably going to be the most popular number, 6625 is basically everything D2L. Any help that you need at all with D2L, you can call them. Any questions you have about how to use D2L, they're 8 to 4:30. So you can call them all the time. And 7933 is Bob's number, and he's great if you want to set up a training date. So if you want to say, hey, I need some extra help, I want somebody to demonstrate this for me in person, then Bob is the number that you can call. And then when you first get to the Dropbox instructions, they'll look like this, but we'll actually go into them. Be sure to watch the video, which actually you're doing right now, so that's covered, check. And then delete all the instructions and add your own instructions to your students, and remember to do all the stuff that we talked about, including if you have multiple files, tell which files go with which SLOs. That's just a little reminder, step 5 there for you. And then assess only using the artifacts that are in the Dropbox. So don't consider anything else. If it's not in the artifact, it shouldn't be considered. And then we're about to talk about how to edit in D2L, specifically editing the D2L Dropboxes so that you can add your own instructions and remove our instructions. And then also how to assess in D2L, so how you use the rubric attached to the Dropbox. Okay, so when you log into D2L and you click on the name of the course that you have the E3 stuff in, it should look like this, and then you want to go to Tasks and click on Dropbox, and that takes you to the Dropbox area. To edit a Dropbox, to change the instructions, you're going to want to click on this caret that's out beside the name, so click on the caret and then click on Edit Folder. And there's several different things you can edit, several different tabs, but we're primarily concerned with the default tab, the Properties tab. You can change the name. E3 Learning Opportunities will be the name of the Dropbox. You can change that. When you get your Dropbox, it is only going to have the E3 assessment rubric and not any other rubric. You can add your own rubric to it if you want to have something additional to assessing, but that's something more complex. And if you want to talk about that, you can talk to the 6625 D2L help people. And then here are the instructions. So you're going to want to be sure to read the instructions, and at the time that you see it, this video will be embedded in there, so you'll watch that video, which you're already doing. But then you'll highlight all of the instructions and delete them and replace with your own instructions. So delete and then write your own instructions in here. And be sure that as you write your instructions, you're really encouraging students to address every single SLO, that if you have multiple file types you're requiring students to use, that you're telling students which file types go with which SLOs, and more importantly telling us. So basically everything that you tell your students should be in here for creating the artifacts, and we hope that those instructions are really detailed, especially on how to address the student learning outcomes that we're going to assess. And then once you're finished with that, all you have to do is save and close. I'm not going to save and close because I want to keep it as is, but that's what you would do. You would just save and close. Now to assess, that's a little bit different. You can just click on this link to assess, or you can click on the caret and do view submissions. So I'm just going to click on the link because I think that's the easiest, and that will allow you to view the files that your students submitted. And here we have fake students. Well, we have student Smith, and we have student 10 and student 7 and student 8 and student 9, and we have already evaluated 3 of them, so I'm going to go evaluate the 4th student by clicking on evaluate. And then once I'm in here, I can download the artifact itself by clicking on download, and it will download the file for me, and then I can open that, but I'm sure you know how to do that. And then I want to assess with this icon. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet in my opinion, and it says assess all rubrics, and that's what I want to do. And so here I can have SLO1, SLO2, SLO3. It will compute the overall score for me, although we don't really care about the overall score as much as we do the individual scores for each SLO. And so you'll look and you'll say, oh, did it make 1 point, and if not 0, and if it made 1 point, look at 2, and if it made 2, look at 3, and so on, so left to right. When you choose what number it is, you just click on it and it will select it. And then we would love for you to add feedback, and this is where you do that. See this little pencil? Erase will delete the feedback, but the pencil will allow you to add, and so you add here, and you can copy and paste quotes, and you can add your own comments justifying why you think it merited a 2 and why you think it didn't merit a 3, for instance, just for example, because we gave it a 2. And if you have quotes from the artifact that are particularly relevant to that SLO, that would be awesome. And then save and record after you've done all of the save and record. And there's one more step as well. There's publish. And so we are now through with evaluating one student. If we wanted to go and evaluate our last student, we would click on next student. We would do the same thing, click on to assess, save and close, and then publish. And if we didn't want to, we could go back to folder submissions. And you'll notice now that I should have 4 different published, and I do 1, 2, 3, 4, and only my last student has not been evaluated. And so that's the D2L Dropbox, and that's pretty much all the information you'll need. We'll leave you with the contact information if you need additional help. So thank you.